San Francisco trembled as a cultural earthquake shook the city. Thousands of young people from around the country were descending on the city's Haight-Ashbury district. Rebels determined to trash their parents' old values while embracing a new age consciousness of sex, drugs, and rock and roll. Encouraged by a loose coalition of beatniks, poets, and writers, these early denizens of the Haight-Ashbury cosmos called for a summer of love in San Francisco, but somebody forgot to tell Police Chief Thomas Cahill.
We know from watching these people and seeing what their activities are, and particularly their activities as far as narcotics are concerned, marijuana, LSD, these are making no contribution to their own lives, to the lives of the community of San Francisco, nor to society as a whole. And certainly nobody should let their young children come into San Francisco unsupervised to become a part of a group such as that.
We do not have an obligation to feed these people, to house them, or to care for them. If they are coming here, they better be prepared to take care of themselves with their own money, to get proper room space, to feed themselves. No public funds will be used. We need it to take care of our city. Nor will they be allowed to sleep in the parks and in public.
Well, if you're going to keep the hippies out, I think you should keep the spades out. And then maybe the Mexicans. Then what about the Polacks? You might as well let them all in.
San Francisco may not have put out the welcome mat, but it was too late to stop the exotic immigration to the city by the Golden Gate. Like it or not, San Francisco was host to a hippie happening, and the cultural clash was inevitable.
There was very much a sense of we can drop out because we don't want what you have. We don't necessarily want the suburban house and the two cars and the sort of dad and mom and buddy and sis checkerboard squares kind of existence.
Is that money they're burning? My God, that's a $5 bill.
Well, nobody ever said hippies didn't know how to have fun at the expense of their straight friends. One long hair even managed to combine good old-fashioned capitalism, hippie humor, even toasted banana peel scrapings, otherwise known as mellow yellow.
Well, we felt that mellow yellow was legal, people could smoke it and enjoy it, and that everybody should have it all across the nation. So we decided to do it ourselves. It's capitalism, laissez-faire style.
Do you get high on it?
I get high on it, yeah. A lot of people get high on it. It works.
California Attorney General Thomas Lynch took the banana business seriously.
If the description given by some of the participants is correct, I can see many problems, and I'm sure we'll have to take a good look at it.
By the summer of '67, be-ins, love-ins, and happenings were a regular routine in nearby Golden Gate Park. And the fact that the flower children were destroying the flower beds triggered a powerful instinct in the park's chief gardener. He wanted revenge on the long-haired hippies.
Well, I'll make a few Yule Brenders out of a couple of them if I can get a hold of them. Yeah, as well as mowing the lawn, we might mow a few of them.
It's unclear exactly who was counting, but media reports estimate that more than 75,000 young people floated through the Haight-Ashbury in that supernatural summer. And so many tourists jammed the Haight to see the freak show that the Gray Line sightseeing line added special hippie tours.
If we are coming up to the beatnik area, all the stores out in this area been taken over by the beatniks, and we see them in all shapes and sizes. I think this one is a girl walking in front of us. She has a hair ribbon, but it's hard to tell.
That's it. Come on out and have your picture taken. Come on, over here and smile for the camera. It's improving by the second. What's that moving on his blanket?
One of the more lasting characters to come out of the Haight hippie era is a songwriter, poet, and professional epigrammicist with the unlikely given name of Ashley Brilliant. Honest. Mr. Brilliant entertained tourists with lyrics like these.
Hippie Hill, if you've got a lifetime to kill, millions of moments by day and by dark, might as well spend them in Golden Gate Park. You don't have to be mentally ill to enjoy sitting perfectly still.
feeling so placid while tripping on acid. It's happening on Hippie Hill.
Sure, people got busted for possession of drugs, but there was a mountainous amount of mind-altering substances available, and at prices that were astonishingly low, even by 1967 standards.
The fellow that bought these paid $10 a piece for them, and say 2 or 3 months ago, they would have gone for $7.50.
And he can make about how many cigarettes out of that?
Out of a bag like that, maybe 60, 70 cigarettes.
San Francisco's finest staged an endless series of raids on Haight-Ashbury pads, but since it appeared that every other hippie was dealing drugs and sharing them with his friends, the cycle was essentially endless. The state of California sent a special anti-drug team to San Francisco. Its chief admitted that the going was tough.
Unfortunately, the hippie community now has taken up the connotation of almost being a sanctuary for people who might experiment with drug use. Unfortunately, some of these individuals start out as psychotic cases or certain neurotic cases. They go to the area and within the, by the 10th contact, do acquire some of the drug and experiment with it.
Establishment warnings did little to curb drug use, and many users showed up here at the newly opened Haight-Ashbury Free Medical Clinic, run by a young toxicologist, Dr. David Smith.
Whenever people get together and interact and take drugs, it potentiates the toxicity of the drug experience, and you're going to see this summer a new concept of health problem, that is a higher incidence of adverse drug reactions, and unless these situations are handled properly, you're going to see a great deal of violence coming out.
It was kind of a social laboratory, but unfortunately it was a social laboratory that went wrong.
Part of what went wrong was the indiscriminate nature of drug use. When potent poison pills were stolen from a medical laboratory, volunteers felt forced to take to the streets to warn Haight-Ashbury residents not to buy the tainted tablets, which someone was peddling as LSD.
It's being sold on the streets as acid. Don't drop anything. We ask you not to drop anything. Anything that you find on the streets, take it to the clinic so we can find out what it is.
One of the flashiest and most dangerous drugs to hit the Haight during the Summer of Love was a pink wedge LSD variant named after an oil additive. The drug was STP.
It has hallucinations, all the signs and all the symptoms, subjective symptoms of an LSD state. The individuals that have taken it report that it's more intense, and there's no question that it lasts longer.
Rock music promoter Chet Helms says drug accidents were inevitable.
When people just randomly took these things out on the street and things like that, not all of them were pleasant experiences. And to me, in my heart of hearts, there will always be psychedelic veterans, just as there are Vietnam veterans. There will be people who gave their lives and minds and so on and so forth to the benefit of all of us, in my opinion.
Charlie Brown Artman qualified as a psychedelic veteran by almost anyone's standards. Charlie, who called himself the boohoo of the Berkeley bag, used religion as a defense for his drug habit.
You mentioned and admitted on the stand that you'd taken peyote and marijuana today.
Yes.
How does that affect your consciousness?
And LSD, too.
And LSD,
yes.
all today.
Mm-hmm.
How does that affect your consciousness and your ability to cope with questions from the floor?
Well, as you see me now, I appear like any other human being. You don't notice anything different.
The psychedelic drug trip was a one-way journey for some unfortunates. One admitted LSD user was convicted of murdering a hippie friend. Police found him gnawing on his victim's severed arm. He's still in jail today.
I would say to young people that they should not come here because they will not be able to cope with the problems in this area. And there are many people who are not good people in this area taking advantage of the hippies themselves and young, inexperienced people coming into the area.
Rock musician Country Joe McDonald recalls that sex and drugs were a kind of 60s sacrament.
We discovered that you could smoke marijuana and not be a dope addict. We discovered that you could have sex before getting married, and it was fun. And so things got carried away because there was no adult authority, there was no authority figure.
People wanted to throw off the old. They wanted to throw off the rigidities of the 50s conformity and the 50s McCarthyite period. They wanted freedom, internal freedom and external freedom, something that we all want, don't we?
Even by stone San Francisco standards, the rock and roll party hosted by the Grateful Dead 20 years ago was a milestone event in that raucous, turbulent, mind-bending period we now talk about as the Summer of Love. You didn't have to be a weatherman to know which way the wind was blowing when an estimated 10,000 hippies and hangers-on showed up for the concert in the Panhandle section of Golden Gate Park. The band, which used to be known as the Warlocks, had graduated from topless bars and fraternity parties and was now known as the Grateful Dead. And appropriate to their Haight-Ashbury audience, they wailed away at dancing in the street. This, by the way, may be the earliest film ever made of a Grateful Dead concert. The Dead wasn't the first successful 60s band from San Francisco, but it was representative of a revolutionary attitude about music that was sweeping the country. In fact, it was a Berkeley-based band, Country Joe and the Fish, that was most direct in its political message. Country Joe hammered away at an anti-war anthem to thousands of disciples massed in Golden Gate Park's Polo Grounds the summer of '67.
It was a very exciting time. We were happening. We were doing something really different. People liked it. We were being successful at it. And it was working.
What Country Joe and a mind-blowing batch of Bay Area bands already knew, long before Marshall McLuhan proclaimed it, is that the medium really is the message. And the music medium put out a constant clarion call to overturn the establishment's control of the government and the promulgation of middle-class culture.
Our job was to provide a musical soundtrack for the era, to provide music and culture for the counterculture, and that's what we did.
The music was experimental to match the psychedelic drugs that were so freely available at concerts. And even if you didn't use drugs, the music made it seem as if you did.
Anything you wanted to be that summer, you could be. You know, any wish that you made would come true. And it did for a lot of people.
The Dead played at an old Haight Street movie house, playfully renamed the Straight Theater. Around town, a dizzying array of bands played places like the Fillmore, Winterland, Family Dog, Fillmore East, and the Avalon. Artists like Stanley Moose and Alton Kelly produced hundreds of psychedelic posters, an entirely new art form, even if most of us had difficulty reading the lettering, to promote concerts by groups like Quicksilver Messenger Service, Sons of Champlain, The Charlatans, Moby Grape, Blue Cheer, and The Joy of Cooking. Amplifiers thundered to Big Brother and the Holding Company with Janis Joplin, Jimi Hendrix, the Jefferson Airplane with Grace Slick. San Francisco was hot musically. Hollywood record labels were busily signing up Bay Area bands, and an enigmatic musical quality called the San Francisco sound was the talk of the music industry from coast to coast.
There were certain elements that characterized the phenomena here, and they were experimentation, fusion of many musical traditions. I think that was really the most important aspect of it, is that many conventions were dropped, that basically anything could be experimented with, anything could be tried.
The musical assault on the senses wasn't enough in rock and roll San Francisco during the Summer of Love. Led by electrical and artistic genius Jerry Abrams, dance hall goers were treated to a kaleidoscopic cacophony of sound and color. Jerry Abrams and the Headlights may have been the most famous of the light show creators, but they were quickly followed by half a dozen visual virtuosos who made color and form run wild. It was a time of incredible artistic freedom.
For me as a songwriter, it was the wonderful opportunity to write about subjects that were not covered in music normally. So I could write subjects about taking drugs, subjects about the President of the United States, about the war in Vietnam, about hitchhiking, about anything.
And if adults didn't like it, or couldn't understand it, or were thoroughly put off by it, so much the better. The music during the Summer of Love was a kind of code for a rebellious generation. San Francisco's flower children may not have invented street theater, but they certainly were accomplished practitioners of improbable improvisation during the Summer of Love. No one had more fun putting on the establishment than the Diggers, a combination commune, playful political group, and street troupe dedicated to the proposition that virtually all of society's values should be challenged and attacked. You simply can't understand the revolutionary nature of what was happening then without zeroing in on the Diggers.
San Franciscans, in the interest of eternity, and out of respect for their mayor, will recommend the following course of action of that office this afternoon. 1, that city-owned buildings remaining empty be restored to the people for reconstruction, embellishment, and refurbishment so that these people might live there freely. 2, that all foodstuffs, materials, and surplus not accounted for in current welfare distribution be returned to the people for redistribution free through 10 autonomous neighborhood free stores whose rent shall be paid by the city.
The hippies were convinced that mainstream society had run amok.
I see three main conditions that led to that wild and spontaneous outbreak. One is certainly the Vietnam War. A lot of resentment about that. 2 is the sheer size of the baby boom generation. A sense of an ability to flex their muscles because they were so large, they made such a difference. And then 3 is the sheer economic wealth that had been built up by the post-World War II economic boom from 1946 up through the 60s. There was a kind of sense that one could live off the garbage of America and survive quite well.
The Diggers did almost literally live off society's garbage. They collected leftover food from grocery stores, bakeries, and restaurants, digging through the debris. And what they didn't need to feed themselves, they gave away to thousands of young people whose only income that summer was from panhandling. Ironically, it was their own garbage that got the Diggers into trouble with city health officials. Annoyed by the Diggers' barbs, and probably encouraged by straight neighbors, health inspectors showed up at the Diggers' commune, and after a quick tour of the premises, declared the place a menace to health and threatened to shut it down.
We are putting the property on 5-day notice to comply with the violations and correct the violations.
We're not hurting anybody. We're not doing anything wrong. We were just one big happy family.
The Diggers dug in, cleaned up, and survived the city's assault on their communal living quarters and went on to become a Haight-Ashbury legend. They ran the free store at Carl and Cole Streets, where a huge assortment of clothing and assorted household junk was available for the taking. No questions asked. The Diggers believed that everything should be free. They showed their disdain for money by throwing it into Haight Street. They monitored the mass media.
Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., Senator Robert Francis Kennedy, Malcolm X, Medgar Evers.
And they thoroughly angered San Francisco's chief of police.
The Diggers are no friends of law enforcement. I might point out they have what they call the DIA, which is the Diggers Intelligence Agency, as they call it. And they are putting out information to warn the people out there that the NARCs, N-A-R-C-S, NARCs, that's what they call narcotics, are out in force. They're talking about the narcotics agents. They are very definitely setting themselves against the police instead of cooperating.
Slowly, the fun started to go out of the Haight-Ashbury. The mood was turning ugly.
You know, you're afraid to go outside sometimes. And you're afraid of footsteps behind you in the Golden Gate Park sometimes. And you hear spades talking and you get paranoid. Who wants to be paranoid of spades, you know? All the things that come on you in this neighborhood are starting to get me really down.
And when the scene soured for the flower children, many ended up here at Wheeler Ranch in Sonoma County, where they lived in tents and makeshift shacks until health authorities once again came along and forced the hippies to move on. The Summer of Love was all too short and nearing an end.
I'm running away from being where I don't want to be.
They may have been flower children when they arrived in the Haight-Ashbury during the Summer of Love 20 years ago, but when the era ended, the fall of '67 by some accounts, a few months later by others, the Haight hippies were bummed out, beaten up, battle-scarred veterans of the ugly urban jungle, but not yet adults. No, not really. more like aging children. The drugs, taken in a sort of 60s communion, began to interfere, to let down. From his desk at the Haight-Ashbury Free Medical Clinic, Dr. David Smith has been following the drug fallout for 2 decades.
Probably the worst inner-city drug epidemic you've ever seen in the United States happened in the late 60s, early 70s here in the Haight-Ashbury. If you remember those times, that post-Summer of Love, it was like World War II. The drug problem was so severe.
There was a widespread, unsupervised drug experimentation, and that also included, because in part, the effect of drugs in loosening people's usual standards of behavior more in different kinds of sexual activity.
60s-style sex had no precedent in the American culture. Hippies didn't invent sex, of course, but there isn't much doubt that they were sexually inventive. And it may well be that our present sexually transmitted disease crisis had its root in the free love generation.
There's been some discussion here and elsewhere with respect to love. Now, there are several kinds of love. I don't know what kind of love these young people are seeking. But in the last 6 years, or last 3 years, there's been 6 times as much venereal disease in this neighborhood.
So what is the legacy of the love generation? Is it more than condoms, faded jeans, granola, and herb tea? Are we left with something other than imperfect memories, earth shoes, and scratched rock record albums? Well, Country Joe McDonald thinks so.
Young people today take for granted things which we had to fight desperately to get. The right to wear your clothes sort of kind of the way you want it, the right to have an earring, the right for girls to wear pants to school, the right to say the word gay in public.
We will all remember Haight Street and the hippie friends we knew, and the scene that was too beautiful to last. Yes, the scene was all too wondrous, and the folks were all too pure to survive the world's materialistic mass. Like bohemians and beatniks, we are doomed to fade away, sinking back into the monstrous middle class.